Hello, Garland Nixon here. Roughly a year and a half after the start of the special military operation in Ukraine, NATO is planning a big meeting in Vilnius. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here. And for those of you who've been standing by, just to let you know, normally on Wednesday mornings, I have a live stream with Scott Ritter. Scott got tied up a little bit this morning, so we're going to have to reschedule. Or should I say, however, this evening, Scott and I will both be appearing on Moat, the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. So it ain't over. How's that? It ain't over till it's over, and it ain't over. Whatever that means. All right, so let's get going. Hopefully people in the other chat, I did mention it to them that I was going to be over. So hopefully at some point people will jump. Maybe somebody will go over there and get the message out that there's another show going on. At any rate, let's talk. So let's start here. And I think it's important to look and see what the NATO people are saying, how they're trying to spin this. Let's start with the spin. And there ain't a whole lot of areas for the NATO jokers to be to make hay. Gabrielius Landsbergis, Lithuanian Foreign Affairs Minister, believes that the NATO summit in Vilnius will become historic either because of its achievement or because of its, quote, lost opportunities. Yeah, that's one way to put it. Lost opportunities. So he says, quote, there are those who say that the summit will be historic in any case. The only question is whether it will be historic because of the achievements or the lost opportunities. Is there such an opportunity? It certainly exists. So lost opportunities, that's just a euphemism. He's saying lost opportunities. What he doesn't want to say is the debacle that we're facing. Absolute debacle. So let me go on. Landsbergis added that he wants to believe that the remaining. Now I love this. Wants to believe. Look at this. Look at this. I always find it interesting when people say that, right? As you know, in law enforcement, I used to do statement analysis, right? And here's what he says. He added that he wants to believe that the remaining weeks before the summit will give us as an alliance the opportunity to fill these gaps and move towards a more historic meeting in Vilnius, and Ukraine will receive a clear signal about the prospects of its NATO membership, right? But let's start with that term. He says, I find it always interesting when people say this, wants to believe, right? It doesn't mean that he believes it. It means that it would be nice. Wouldn't it be nice? It's another way of saying, boy, it sure will be great. Wouldn't it be nice if, but here's what that leaves out whenever someone says wants to believe, right? What are the probabilities? Because that would be the obvious question. I want to believe that I'll be a billionaire by next Thursday. Okay, everybody in the chat would like to, I'd like to believe that I'm going to walk outside and a bag of money, $10 million in $100 bills is going to fall out of the sky in a satchel and drop right next to me in non-sequential. Get out of here. That's what I want to believe. But what are the probabilities based on the data and empirical information that we have? What are the probabilities, right? He wants to believe that the remaining weeks before the summit, what he's saying is this, will somehow be different than the last year and a half. I want to believe that for a year and a half, everything has turned to crap for NATO. But these next couple of weeks, it's all going to suddenly reverse itself. Let's continue. Lithuania is one of NATO's members. In total, there are 31 of them, and we have a political position. We defend it. We help Ukraine with all the tools and all the forces, right? So let's go into that. He says Lithuania is one of the members. Yeah, it is. But I mean, what do they got? Like 11 people? Yes, we're one of the members. And in comparison to the rest of the members, how large are you? Pretty much non-existent, but we're one of the members. We provide them with the tools. And here's what they say. He says, uh, we help Ukraine with all of the tools and all of the forces. It's not what you help them with. How's that working out leading into the summit? Let's continue. Lithuania seeks to highlight challenges to its security during the summer, which are specifically related to our geographical position and the presence of a border with both Russia and Belarus. We want it to be reflected through this prism. Again, this is where you are. But what is the danger to you? What would precipitate an attack on Russia? One of the things that NATO has tried to push is that Russia, they're just crazy, and the leaders of Russia are crazy, and they just attack people for no reason, absolutely ignoring the issue of NATO enlargement. But fortunately, that discussion is out there. Only, amongst the Lithuanias and Latvias and the postage stamp sized countries of Eastern Europe, and of course those who are pushing the propaganda. Okay, yeah, fine. The Russians just invaded for no reason, but the rest of the world knows leading into this summit. Natalia Halibaranka, the ambassador of Ukraine to NATO, believes the Vilnius summit should offer a certain commitment of guarantee of future membership for Kiev. So let's talk about this thing coming up. Number one, the Biden people have already said recently, nah, ain't happening. Here's the other problem, Ukraine. And okay, for Ukraine to talk about NATO membership is really no different than me talking about wanting that bag of money to fall out of the sky. We already know a couple of things. Number one, that there are a number of NATO members who absolutely oppose it and will not vote for it. We also know, and this is how silly that is, what would be the point of it? Because if Ukraine becomes a NATO member, that means that immediately, so they'd say, you're a NATO member, right? Yes. Okay, now we want to invoke Article 5, which means not that necessarily NATO would have to join in the battle, but they'd have to have this big consideration process. So what would happen is immediately Ukraine would try to initiate Article 5. So what would be the point of that? If you're just going to, if NATO's going to go in, which a lot of people don't understand, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the physical, the material capacity to join that conflict right now. Not saying that they're not stupid enough. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but they don't have the physical capacity to join the conflict right now. But at any rate, so the bottom line is this: he's saying let's get that clear right now. Let's clear that particular issue up right now. Ukraine is saying we want to get in NATO. Some of the hawkish hawks in Europe are saying bring Ukraine into NATO. It's just never going to work because it has to be unanimous and they're never going to get the votes. Biden's even saying no. Right now, it appears to me, if you look at a couple of things, and I think these are relative, so I'm going to bring this in U.S. foreign policy. A couple of things going on right now. If you notice, the U.S. is kind of clandestinely talking to Iran again, trying to revive the JCPOA. Tony Blinken just went to China. It appears that they're trying to, excuse me for yawning, they're trying to turn down the volume just a little on China. Now, of course, Joe Biden, being the idiot that he is, botched it up within 24 to 48 hours, but that's irrelevant. It's obvious that it's possible that going into election season, it's possible that maybe there's pressure coming internally, externally, but the U.S. empire is making some effort to turn the volume down a little bit. They've screwed up everything. The U.S. right now has the worst, the Biden administration has the worst relations ever with Russia, with China, with Iran, with all of Africa, with Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Middle East, with all of Latin America. They have the worst relationship ever with pretty much the entire world. And now it seems that maybe they're trying to dial it back a little, but nobody trusts them. But the bottom line is, so they're going into NATO, facing a diplomatic debacle in the Middle East where China snuck in there and got a peace deal. A diplomatic debacle, a political debacle in Africa, where the African leaders are saying, we're down with Russia and China, we can't stand you. Right, basically a political debacle, and possibly, potentially a military debacle in the Pacific, where they're pushing China up to their red lines, and that could go bad, which would be the absolute destruction of the U.S. economy, of the world's economy, but possibly even leading to a nuclear conflict and the destruction of the U.S. Right now, North Korea, the Biden administration has the worst relationship ever with North Korea. So the bottom line is Biden and the Blinken Secretary of State, the Blinken State Department, have the worst relationship ever worldwide with everybody. Everybody hates them. Nobody trusts them. Need I even turn that internally? Internally, what's going on? They're going after Trump, and a significant portion of America sees that as lawfare, is furious about it. They're on the edge of bringing Julian Assange home. There are a lot of people around the world that see that as lawfare, as a constitutional attack, as an attack on press freedom. That's kind of going to be a problem for them if they as it moves on. Meanwhile, Hunter Biden gets charged. People here in the U.S. are saying, well, that ain't fair, because he's getting a slap on the wrist and you're going after Trump and all of his people, with, you're opening up the howitzers on them, and you're barely giving this guy, you go after him with the iron fist, you go after him with a velvet glove. So you've got an equal protection under the law issue, right? So they got problems everywhere going into NATO. Need I add that NATO is being, in my opinion, NATO is only being held together with bubble gum and duct tape right now. The economic situation is, again, the economic situation, they're facing the debacle. So a year and a half into this disaster, the NATO countries are going to come together, and look what they're facing. The last thing they're facing is the most predictive, in that they spent the whole winter saying, hey, we had an offensive in September and we took some areas. So that's coming again in the spring. And they gave the Russians all the time they needed to prepare to build defensive lines. And then this was a complete debacle. They tried it for, I don't know, 8 to 10 days, whatever the case may be. And it was just an absolute disaster, with Ukrainian soldiers getting slaughtered, and Western material that was given to the Ukrainians getting just destroyed. The tactics were exposed as ludicrous, bringing a Western equipment to get together in bunches and just getting it all blown up. The entire thing was, as the term I've used for Ukraine is, the mother of all debacles. They have created the mother of all debacles. So now what? Here's where they are going. Let's examine exactly where the Biden administration is going into NATO, going into Vilnius, going into the NATO summit meeting. Militarily, that's the big one. This fight is over. The world can see it. Everybody can see it. I would imagine the U.S. military can see it. The war, as far as a kinetic conflict, is over. When you have, it's like this. Think about this. You're playing chess, right? And what is chess? What is a board game? What is a card game, right? What you have is this. You have that combination of things that are predictable and the unpredictable, right? Control and chaos, right? If you're playing chess, you have things you can control, where you move your people. In a board game, whatever, but you can't control the other person, what they're going to do. There's dynamics you can't control. In a game of cards, right? You're looking at your hand, you can control what decision you make, but when you turn the cards over, it's chaos, and they're shuffled and you don't know. So it's always control versus chaos. That is the game we play in life in one way or another. So if you look at and let me ask you this: if someone's playing chess and somebody makes a move, and they can now see that within 2 to 3 moves it's over, that there's no way out, that at that point, the other person's going to checkmate them because they only have a few options, and any of the options they take are going to lead them into a checkmate. At this point, you're wasting their time, right? So what do? You just get rid of you clear the board and start again. This game is effectively over, right? You're playing a game. How many games do we have when we're playing people? You're playing a particular game. You ever play tic-tac-toe? If you know how to play it, whoever goes first, depending upon how things goes, if you know how to play tic-tac-toe, you should never lose. Worst case scenario, there's only two things that can happen if you know how to play tic-tac-toe if you move first. Either you're going to tie or you're going to win. If you know how to play, you're never going to lose. As soon as you make your move, I think it's the second or third move, whatever. At that point, you generally know what direction it's going to go, and there's no point playing anymore. So here's my point. In the games that we play of control versus chaos, whether it's a board game, whether it's cards, whether it's tic-tac-toe, things like that, at the point where you know the outcome, technically the game is over, right? If you know it's unavoidable, the game is over. I often use a kind of but fun little watching sci-fi movie called The Last Starfighter. And people who have been listening to me for a long time know where I'm going with that, right? In The Last Starfighter, one of the things that happened was they had this gigantic ship, right? Planet killer kind of ship, right? And the bad guys running it, and the spaceship had been hit, and the helmsman looks at the, captain, the leader, he says, "Captain, the helm's not responding. We have no control of the engines. We have no control of the rudders, and we're caught in the planet's gravity. It's drawing us in. What do we do?" And the captain has a little monocle. He takes his monocle down. He looks at him and he says, "We die." Right? At that point, based on the data that he had given him, there was only one outcome. If you're caught in the planet's gravity, you have no way to pull out of it. You have no engines, you have nothing, you have no hope. The inevitable is upon you. You're going to die. That's it. There's no real hope there, right? That's a reality. At that point, the game can only go in one direction. I say all that to say this. When you look at what's going down in Ukraine, this war is over. Going into NATO, what do we know? You might as well, there's checkmate. You might as well turn the board over. You might as well reshuffle the deck. When you get to the point that the outcome becomes obvious, that means the game is over. You hear what I'm saying? So going into NATO, what are they going to talk about? I tell you what they're not going to talk about: the military defeat of Russia in Ukraine. That's what they said. Russia can't win. We have to win. Ukraine has to win. Now, Russia all along has said, this ain't between us and Ukraine. That's a joke. This is between us and all of, they don't use the word U.S. empire. What the Russians say is the combined West, or NATO. What they mean is the U.S. empire. So the U.S. empire not having the capacity to drag its vassals into a World War III scenario, and also fearing that could end in their destruction, rightfully so, because it likely would, right? They know good and well, if we go for all-out war against Russia, we're all going to die. There ain't no way about that. Again, guess what? Doesn't that come back to what I said, control versus chaos? If you already know the outcome, the game is over. The U.S. already knows. If we decide we're going to attack Russia, we know the outcome. The outcome is we're all going to die. In that instance, what the U.S. would be, their only option would be to launch a preemptive nuclear attack because they know what's coming. But still, that wouldn't do them any good. What good would it do? Russia has subs lurking in the ocean everywhere. They've got hypersonic missiles that the U.S. has no way to stop. So the bottom line was, any way the U.S. takes the option of going toe-to-toe with Russia, two things happen. One, they lose a big part of NATO. A big part of NATO says, whoa, 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 that's a red line. Also, the world then completely turns on them and says, whoa, you're going to kill us all. And last but not least, at that point, if the U.S. were to say we're going in and fight the Russians, The bottom line is they've been demilitarized. They put all of their stuff in. With what? They couldn't fight them for a week. And after a week, they'd run out of stuff. So it would be very, very difficult. Not to mention, last but not least, or rather to mention, last but not least, if the Russians, if the US said we're going to war with Russia, China cannot allow Russia to lose, because you got Russia, China, China, Russia. They know they're next. At that point, China would have to move on Taiwan. At that point, if they said we're going to war with Russia, China would immediately surround Taiwan and say we're taking Taiwan, because they would force the US to then say we're going to launch an assertive attack on both Russia and China, that we are going to initiate a military confrontation with Russia and China at the same time. I truly believe, Ray McGovern has said it, and I'll say it again, if the US were to say, okay, that's it, we're going to go to war with Russia, China at that point would have no alternative for a couple of reasons, not the least of which being they cannot let Russia lose. Secondly, they can't let, they would know we're looking at a nuclear confrontation, so we might as well act. This is our last chance, because none of us may survive. So they'd have to move on that. Also, here's the other part. They're watching what happens in Ukraine, because they know whatever the US does in Ukraine, the US will do in Taiwan. At that point, they would look at it and they'd say, you know what? It's obvious how this plays out. At some point, the US is going to say, we're going to go to war with China over Taiwan. We'll initiate. Right. So they would at that point have no choice. There would be an ultimate outcome that they would know at that point. Sooner or later, we're going to war with the US. So we better go and take Taiwan now and force their hand. They would also know we can't let Russia win. So lose or end up having to face the US empire by themselves. Not that I'm saying that Russia would or wouldn't lose. I don't think they would. But a long drawn out war would turn nuclear quick. So bottom line, you get what I'm saying. It's not an option right now for the US empire. It's not a great option for them. And I don't think they could drag NATO in. I think if the US says, okay, we're going in, I think NATO crumbles. I think NATO cracks. Because, add this, how are you going to drag them in without the people? If Joe Biden goes on TV and says, I've got an announcement to make as the president of the United States, we are attacking Russia, we're going to war with Russia, he'd have some problems in Congress, because the people here would go bananas. They would go bananas. They're a huge point. It would totally destabilize the country, because everybody would know it's death, that they're all going to die. Not to mention, how you going to go to war with Russia and China without a draft? Okay, we're drafting everybody. How's that going to work out? How about Europe? A draft. How's that going to work out? All right, Germans and French and everybody else. Good news. We're drafting you all. It's World War III. We're going up to the border with Russia. Oh, you're probably going to die in a tactical nuke strike. Did I mention that? You're probably going to die quickly anyway, but let's go get this thing out of the way so all of your sons and daughters can go. They want to throw the girls in now. Your sons and daughters, we're going to put them in the military. We're going up to the Russian border and they're all going to die. Oh, by the way, so are you. Not a great option right now. So the Biden administration going into NATO, all of these going into the NATO meeting, for all of these people who are saying we're going into the NATO meeting, and I think the US is going to get froggy and they're going to say we're going in. I don't see that happening. And you cannot dismiss the issue of military weaponry. As you know, if you're going to do something, you got to have the option of doing it. You have to have the tools, as Stanley says, the right tool for the right jobs, right? Where would they get the tools from? It is fairly obvious by now that Germany, they've said we're running out of stuff. We don't have anything. France, we've given everything there. UK, we didn't have much. The stuff that we have is gone. So if they were going to even go to war with Russia, where would they get the stuff? Number one. Number two, and this is critical, if they're going to go to war with Russia on Russia's border, how would they transport it? How long would it take? We're going to go to Russia's border. Really? What are you going to do? We got to get 1 million troops to Russia's border. How long will that take? We don't have the 1 million troops, so we got to draft, and then we got to deal with the American pushing back and all these countries saying no. Give us 3 years. You think Russia's going to sit around? If you threaten to attack them, you think they're going to sit around and wait for 3 years for you to assemble the things that you need? Oh yeah, we don't have enough tanks. Russia, can you give us 2.5 years to build enough tanks to attack you? I don't think that's going to happen. Again, it has worked out. I said this from long time ago. Somebody put down Putin's patience. Beware the fury of a patient man. Time is on Russia's side. People, for I don't know how long, I have had disputes with brilliant military minds, and a lot of these brilliant military minds know far more than me, but I just went by intuition, right? Here's the way I think. What would I do if it were me, right? So, and you've heard this controversy going on, right? When's Russia going to launch the big arrow offensive? When's Russia going to bring down the hammer? When's Russia going to come down and crush them, right? All along, my position was this. If I were Russia, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't make a big offensive. Number one, you lose a lot of people. You get in a big fight. Why? If my enemy is crashing, I'm getting out of his way. I'm going to just keep chipping and chipping away. What Russia's doing, I think, is what Russia's going to continue to do. They set up a trash compactor for NATO. Hey, we got this big trash compactor. Please donate your weaponry. And NATO is donating their weaponry into the Ukrainian trash compactor. And Russia is, in a nice and friendly way, disposing of it for them. And the more they do that, the weaker NATO gets. Additionally, NATO is struggling because they don't have the resources that they need. They don't have the energy that they get from Russia. Russia's just laying low. Winter's coming, bro. You made it through one winter because it was exceptionally warm. Will the next one be exceptionally warm? Even if it is, who knows if the European countries can make it through. So to me, for Russia to launch a big arrow offensive would be needless. It would kind of play into NATO's hands. I'm not saying they're not going to do it. I'm simply saying I would not. What I'm doing is working. Not to mention, or rather, I always say not to mention, to mention. How about that? Russia, you got to understand that Russia has alternative plans. It's not just military. The military is holding NATO in place in Ukraine. Right. So NATO is going to talk about the military, what's going on in Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. What they aren't really going to get into, what they can't really talk about at the NATO meeting is the diplomatic war. Russia and China, Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, Middle East. So China, Russia are winning the diplomatic war. They hold NATO in place. They hold NATO's focus in Ukraine. They hold the U.S. empire's focus in Ukraine. And it works well for China, too, because of Taiwan. So they hold it's a holding, move, kind of like you see sometimes. I'm not saying it's intentional, but it works out that way. Sometimes you'll hear when it comes to the battlefield that one side will put a bunch of troops here. They ain't planning on attacking anybody, but that's just so you have to hold some troops there so you can't reinforce otherwise. You got to keep some troops there so you can attack. A holding move, right? That's effectively what Ukraine is to some extent, whether intentionally or not intentionally for Russia. It's a holding move. It holds the attention of the U.S. empire in Ukraine first and foremost. They got to focus on that. They got to pay attention to that. They got to be scared. They've got to put their money, their time, their resources, all in that. Meanwhile, Russia and China are working together. They're doing all the things they need to do to get their economy ready so that when this is over, they'll be ready to dominate economically. They'll be ready to dominate politically. They'll be ready to dominate diplomatically. This time, just think if it had been over in a month as opposed to now. Isn't it so much better for Russia and China that it wasn't over in a month? If it had been over in a month, we wouldn't have had the Saudi-Iran rapprochement. The African countries wouldn't have come together so staunchly. They wouldn't be operating as a bloc on behalf of the Eurasian coalition. You look at BRICS. You got 19 countries ready to join BRICS. BRICS is growing like mad. You wouldn't have Africa's now talking about getting a new currency, de-dollarization. Brazil's talking about it, all the de-dollarization. Why that happened? Because of the time period that this has gone on. Over the course of time, all of these things that have happened to benefit Russia and China, to benefit the Eurasian coalition. So we look at the time period and we say, because this happened, The longer it goes on, the more it seems to benefit Russia and China. And of course, let me add this, the internal problems. We get closer to the election. It makes the options for the Biden administration fewer. As we get closer to the election, it gets more difficult for them to be more militaristic and assertive. They're afraid of stepping on a landmine. They're afraid of blowing something up to the point where it becomes disastrous. And might I add, you got Trump saying, I'm the peace candidate and I'm pushing back against it. Believe it or not, whatever the case, that's up to you. Trump's saying that. You got Cornel West now coming in, punching Biden. He's a militaristic neoliberal, milquetoast neoliberal, militaristic. He's pushing back, literally using the word U.S. empire. You got RFK Jr. talking about, hey, we got to dismantle the empire. We got to close these bases. Because this thing is dragging out, around the world diplomatically, the Eurasian coalition is winning the war diplomatically and politically. At home, the pressure is cranking and turning up. Because the U.S. empire, Biden people have to keep throwing money into Ukraine, that's pissing people off as we go into an economic downturn. That's getting more and more unpopular. Europe's economy is done, finished, falling apart. That's getting more unpopular. We now look at Germany and we see that the SPD, we see that basically the Greens, they're falling behind the AfD. So politically, if I'm Putin, I'm just sitting here, man, and I'm just going to be like, just move a little bit at a time. Hey, if they call, hey, we think we can take 100 kilometers a day. Nah. How about 100 meters? Just take 100 meters and get yourself some tea. Get yourself some kvass and pear soda, guys. Chill out. If you can take 100 meters, take 100 meters and chill. Let's not be in such a rush. If you see that, if you get in a fight, look for your advantage. If your advantage is speed, use speed. If your advantage is agility, use agility. If it's strength and power, use strength and power. Whatever your advantage is, use your advantage. In the instance of this, going into this NATO meeting, the advantage of Russia is time. Right now, they're looking at weeks. We got a couple weeks. Basically, if we go back to what this guy from Vilnius said, he said, where is it? Okay, Landsberg added that he wants to believe that the remaining weeks before the summit will give us as an alliance the opportunity to fill these gaps and move towards a more historic leaders meeting in Vilnius. So here's the thing about it. NATO's been fighting for a year and a half and ain't nothing happened. And they're hoping for a miracle in the last couple of weeks before the NATO meeting. When they go into that meeting, now, of course, we understand how the NATO meeting works. We understand how that has to work. When there is a NATO meeting, the true believers come, right? The prophets of neoliberalism, the prophets of the U.S. empire and colonialism come in, the high priests of that. So they can't possibly come in and face the truth. They can't come in. It would be like the Pope saying there is no God, right? He couldn't possibly do that, even if he believed it. I'm not saying anything about it other than saying that the Pope couldn't come out and say that if he believed it or not. Well, the equivalent of the neoconservative U.S. empire, European colonialist Pope right now is Joe Biden. And his high priests are all around him, Schultz and Sunak and all of that. They can't tell the truth. Well, first of all, they couldn't tell the truth if you waterboarded them. If you wanted them to tell the truth, I don't think they have the capacity. But they can't hear. Don't expect reality because they are in a corner. If they go in there and say, man, our offensive didn't work out well, this war is over. And we know it's over. As I said, if you're playing chess, and you look and you can see that within the next 3 moves, one of the others will be checkmated and there's no way out of that. Effectively, the game is over. And when we looked at the state of the battlefield, and what we saw was that the Ukrainians are unable to launch a counterattack of any type, an offensive of any type effectively. They're running short of weapons. The intelligence of the Russians and the ability to find their warehouses and their storage facilities and their anti-aircraft material and to take it out before they even get a chance to use it is dramatically increasing. So things ain't getting better. We're only a couple moves away from checkmate. Here's what I would argue. The truth of the matter is this. And if you look at the battlefield, it's fairly obvious now. You got a cat toying with a mouse now. You got a cat that he lets the mouse run and he hits him with this paw. He lets the mouse run that way and he hits him with that paw. And he just laughs because he knows anytime I want, I can eat this mouse. But I'm just going to use him like a little toy and let him run around a little bit. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to swallow him when I'm ready. Right? You've got Russia now who has demonstrated. You got Russia now has clearly demonstrated that they can easily repel any offensive attacks that the NATO proxies can mount. The NATO proxies gave them everything they had, and it didn't look like they claimed there was a lot of fighting. Based on what I saw, yes, there was some fighting, right? But it didn't look like there was it doesn't look like that it was it could go either way. It's certainly, from the things that I saw, from the things that I read, it was obvious. Yeah, they pushed, took a town here and there, Ukraine, a small village, a clump of houses, and then immediately lost it. That the number of troops that they lost, the equipment that they lost was so overwhelming that they had to throw in the towel within the first couple of days. They had to say, "Now, man, we can't keep doing this. We got to throw in the towel. We're going to do a operational pause." Well, here's the problem with an operational pause. Pause is not stopping and ending. Pause implies we're going to stop for a little bit, then we're going to start again. Now, they've been gearing up for this thing for months. They try it for 10 days. They get hammered, and then they say, we're going to pause. When are you going to restart? What's the plan now? To go back to all of the countries that gave you stuff and say, all that stuff you gave us, yes, I got blown to hell and destroyed and wiped out. Let's try this move again. Now think about this. The Russians have had, maybe 6 months to build their defenses. The Ukrainians ran into those defenses and got chewed up, mowed down like cordwood. Yeah, let's get our stuff together. How long is it going to take? 3 more months. And what are the Russians going to do? Same thing they've been doing all along. They're going to continue to harden their defenses. If you can't get through their defenses now, as they continue to attack, they've been doing nightly drone and missile attacks for the last month, taking out everything behind the lines. Ukraine is not getting stronger. And might I add, the support throughout the U.S. empire is not getting stronger. Nothing's getting stronger. So if you have your operational pause, let's hold on. What are the Russians going to be doing while you pause? They're going to be loading up. They're going to be punching the daylights out of you while you pause. Just because the Ukrainians pause, the Russians ain't going to pause. What do you say? Hey, an operational pause, Russians. Can you give us a break? Do you think the Russians are going to be, sure, we'll stop the missile attacks and artillery, we'll call that off. Drones, we'll chill. No, really? What do you do if you're defending yourself? Garland Nixon's walking down the street and some guy jumps on his back and it says he's going to rob me. And I turn around and I hit the guy and the guy gets stunned. The guy grabs me from behind and I just shoot him back, rear elbows, wham, right to the snoot, right? He comes at me. I feel somebody grab me. A hand comes around my throat and instinctively that elbow goes back, bam, and snaps him. This hand goes down, whap, slaps him in the groin, turn around with a punch, whap, 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 right? Strike this guy in the face, in the groin, clap his ear, one hand clap to his ear, and I turn around. Okay, so I've struck him, bop, bop, bop. And he's stunned. Oh, what do you think I'm going to do at that point? Now, I have one option. I can just run, right? He's stunned. He's in pain. I can take off. The other is I can now continue until he drops. When he pauses, because he's in pain, I can come in and strike. Bam, 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 bam. Strike, 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 strike. Elbows, knees, fists, punches, you name it. Just strike this guy, gouge his eyes out, boom, to the throat, you name it, right? Just strike this guy. He pauses. I can go away if that's my choice, or I can say, well, he may pause and come after me again. I don't want him to do this. When I want to walk, I want to leave him laying on the ground. Hit him, do a takedown, stomp his head into the pavement. He attacked me. I didn't attack him. I got to assume he's trying to kill me. Take off, right? But see, my point being this is this: you're doing an operational pause. Putin is a martial artist, a black belt. He knows his options, right? He knows when you have see, here's the thing. Depends on why you pause. Did you pause because you want diplomacy? Right? If you operational pause, was it because they wanted diplomacy? No, it was due to the futility of their attack, and that they were facing a complete and total debacle. So that operational pause means this: the Russians are hitting you constantly, hitting you. You say, okay, we're coming. You attack. The Russians slaughter you, the attackers, and you say, I'm going to pause. So now the Russians have options. They can say, as I said, I can turn around and hit you with a bunch of blows and take off, right? Because you're stunned. The Russians can now say, you're stunned. They can launch a counteroffensive. Now, this would be the perfect time for a counteroffensive if they choose, because you're stunned. You're feeling like, again, that guy grabs Garland, and I'm walking down this dark street. The guy grabs me, and he's going to take my wallet and rob me, right? He's not expecting an assertive offensive attack. He didn't see that coming. So he's thinking, I got him. He got me. He grabs me. Man, that elbow to the snoot, wham! Somebody grabs you from behind. You can boom right in here, right? You can hit him like that. You can elbow him. You can go down this way and slap to the groin. There's all these kinds of things that you can do. Their hands come around here. You grabs a couple of fingers and snap those and turn those sideways. It's on the shoulder. They go on the shoulder, you grab that, boom. You can just grab that and walk right around in a circle with those fingers. And those fingers are going to go in the wrong direction. All kinds of things. This guy wasn't expecting that he was going to attack and he was going to face an attack. He was expecting to attack a person who would fall apart and then he'd take them out, right? So they did this. They attacked. NATO was rubbing their hands together. Okay, we're going to get some wins. We're going to do this. So now they got swatted down. Russia can come back. You've got them stunned. You've got them disheartened. If Russia wants to, this would be the prime time to counterpunch and counterattack. That's the option Russia has. Russia has options. The other option Russia has, which is the one I would take, is swat that down and just keep on doing what you're doing. Ain't no rush. I don't need to take you down. Like I said, you go down, wham, I can just walk. If I hit you, bop, 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 I can just turn around and walk away. I don't have to run. I can just walk away. You're laying on the ground, you're hurt, you're bloody, you're holding your groin, your eyes are poked. I don't even have to run. I can walk away. So the Russians have option after option. And one of the options that I think the Russians are going to take, and I think this is relevant to the NATO meeting, is the Russians are simply going to keep on doing what they're doing. I've been saying this all along. Take your time. It makes it more difficult. Just think of the other thing too, and the Russians know this, that there's a certain element of neocons that want to get out of the Ukraine debacle so they can have a debacle in China. But China is Russia's now #1 trading partner. They buy all this oil. They buy all this stuff from Russia. They provide lots of things in Russia that the Russians that got cut off by the sanctions. So Russia really needs China. China really needs Russia. So Russia has to work in concert with China. So it kind of wouldn't necessarily benefit Russia to let NATO off the hook and just let them, resolve this thing easily and get it finished quick, because then the hawks could then focus on China, which again, if China falls, Russia falls. If China falls, then Russia doesn't have the economic backstop it needs, and eventually it falls. It can't do so. They can't do that. So the best thing for Russia when it comes to militarily speaking, they don't want to lose a lot of troops, and they don't want to blow this thing up into a big confrontation. When it comes to diplomatically speaking, it gives them more time to build their diplomatic bases around the world, with Africa, the Middle East, etc., and to enact their various economic plans with these countries. When it comes to their alignment with Russia and India, it gives them a chance to continue to work to try to smooth over things between India and Russia. It gives them a chance to continue to, between India and China. It also gives them the ability to maintain their trade with China and not have that interrupted. So everything benefits Russia to chill out and take it slow. You don't, if I'm Russia, the way I want to resolve this is I want them to have to come to me and say, hey, how do we solve this, right? If this guy attacks me and grabs me from behind, I want to beat him up. Or what happens if I get him in a wrist lock and he's laying on the ground and his wrist is going back this way and he's going and now he's ready to negotiate. Please, please, I'm sorry, let me go. Now he's ready to negotiate, but he's negotiating from the position of a wrist lock. That ain't not very good. You ain't got a real strong negotiating position, right? So if I want to negotiate, I want to have you in a wrist lock. I want to have you in some kind of a lock. I want to have you in a compromised position. So from that perspective, the guy that attacks you, you want to take him out, put him in a compromised position, right? A lot of people have attacked the person. They grab him, and that arm goes out, and they grab him, and they put him in a wrist lock, finger lock. What do they put him in? Some lock. The person drops and says, Now it's negotiating time. But you negotiate from a position of weakness because your wrist is bending in the wrong direction, and the person can snap it anytime they want. You are now existing at their pleasure, at their leisure, and you got to beg for mercy. That's the way to negotiate when your opponent is begging for mercy. So the way Russia wants this thing to end is keep the pressure on until they can't provide any weapons anymore because they're all out. You want to get them to a point where now could possibly sometime in the future NATO be able to provide weaponry to Ukraine? Sure, but they're going to hit a hard stop, and they're getting close there now. They're going to hit a hard stop where NATO is like, if you can give us a year, we can start supplying you with weapons again, Ukraine. But right now, man, we're flat out. And they may have already hit that, but they're hitting a hard stop. They're getting close to a hard stop where Ukraine is basically going to be out of weaponry. They're going to be out of people, out of weapons, out of time. And that, if I'm Russia, that's when I'm ready to negotiate. I'm still not ready to negotiate. I'm waiting for you to be ready to negotiate. I'm waiting for you to call me. And I think that's what we're looking at. And it could be that, but we're not far from this meeting in Vilnius, but we're going to get there. We're going to get to the point where a lot of voices in NATO recognize the reality of the situation that they put themselves in by debacle after debacle, by this economic attack on Russia that is becoming an absolute debacle because China was their backstop and India was their backstop. Because here's the other thing I think that is critical. Don't overlook this. One of the things that I think was important was that Russia brought the Africans, a bunch of African leaders, not just any African guy, leaders, national leaders of Africa, as a bloc. You guys come to Russia and talk about peace. And they said, hey, we got a peace plan. Here's our peace plan. You let them know that you view them as a bloc, as an important and critical part of the world, as an equal bloc, not somebody to be for their stuff to be stolen. And what's happened? The Russians are saying, hey, the West has been robbing the Africans, which they are. So what is brilliant that the Russians and the Chinese have done is they have helped the Africans to come together as a single bloc. I even heard one of the African leaders or an African person, intellectual, talking about this, basically saying, look, we got a lot of small countries. Individually, we're weak. But if we act as a bloc, we're very powerful. We got natural resources. We can build cartels of lithium and gold and things like that. We got to act as a bloc. In Russia, bringing all the African leaders together. Number one, they went through Poland and they got to see how racist these bastards are, right? They got to see what kind of treatment that they would get from the Europeans, which is the same they've always gotten, is crappy. And they came to Russia and they get the gold, they get the red carpet, and Putin sits down with them and says, hey guys, I'm down with it, but look, you can't trust these sons of bitches. Here's the data right now. He gives them a document that basically shows that Russia had a deal and it got nixed by the West. And of course, the Africans are like, yeah, that ain't hard for us to believe. Trust me. They've overthrown most of our leaders, killed them, kidnapped them, you name it, couped them, etc. Right? So as we get closer to desperation for NATO, where some of the NATO countries say we can't hold this fight up any longer, you're going to have worldwide pressure. China, it was critical. China came out and said, we got a plan for peace. You need to take it. US, we're not even thinking about that, right? You've got the Middle Easterners now doing their thing, coming together, saying, hey, we're going to get our act together here, and we want to work together with Russia and China. Now you have the Africans, which will be Africa has natural resources. It's been robbed by the colonial powers in the US empire, but it has a lot of natural resources. It has a lot of economic potential, and it's coming together as a bloc. And I would say China and Russia were instrumental in bringing that bloc together, bringing that unity together. And so you're going to have inside the empire countries like Germany and France saying we can't do this anymore. We're out of time, and we're out of money, and we're out of weapons. What are we going to do? And outside, you're going to have the powerful blocs around the world all coming together saying it's time to do something here. Let's try to get a deal and finish this thing off and shut this down. Also, and I think this is important, I think this is a way of avoiding, the longer this goes on, the harder it gets for the US empire to drag this thing out to China. Because when this debacle finally falls apart, you're going to bring countries together for part two. A whole lot of countries are going to see this debacle. It's going to collapse, this debacle, and they're going to say, oh, you got to be kidding me. Now we're going to do this again with an even bigger country. No, that ain't going to happen. I think that China will be a part of the final deal. China, see what is going to happen inevitably is the Russians are going to say, yes, we're willing to work with you guys and get a deal. However, the guarantors of the deal, whatever it's going to be, will be the African bloc, will be a Middle Eastern bloc, will be a Latin American bloc, will be a Chinese bloc, and then you can have the French and Germans bloc, but it ain't going to be one of these France and Germany and will be the UN Security Council, and we've got to add Africa and Latin America as voting members of the Security Council. It's going to give them the opportunity to strengthen their economic and diplomatic bloc and to solidify the Eurasian coalition as a bloc that is powerful and that is part of the world order. So to close this, when this thing finally has to close, and it will, I believe it will. The time is coming when it will. And because Russia's moving slow, it will. Because Russia is moving slow, it will come to a close. If they were moving fast, it could blow up bad. But because they're moving slow, they're slowly allowing this thing to collapse. They're chipping away at everything. They're chipping away at the military foundation, at the diplomatic foundation, at the economic foundation of the U.S. empire, and building their coalition, and it's going to work. And going into this NATO meeting, let me just say this. The only thing I really expect from the NATO meeting is the same bluster. I expect the NATO meeting where Biden and Blinken and his ilk will come in and say Russia's fighting with shovels and they can't possibly win. They ran out of missiles, and the missiles they have are powered by washing machine chips, and we are on the march and we're just a winning away. Win, win, win. All we do is win, right? I expect that, Stoltenberg and von der Leyen will come in and they'll preach the NATO, yes, we're winning. Russia can't win. Putin's evil. Putin can't win. We're moving on. Big things are happening. Oh, I can't wait. Everybody just keep on holding on tight. We've got to stay together and continue fighting. I expect that, but I do expect some pushback. So bottom line is this: the NATO meeting really doesn't mean much. It's going to be a cheerleading squad. We're going to talk about it. We're going to say, look, the meeting's going on and they're saying this, and oh, will they attack? And oh, they're coming together to say we got to go to war. Will they all come together? They got nothing to go to war with. If you're going to shoot somebody, you got to have bullets and a gun, and they've all been blown to smithereens. And it's going to be that. Understand this. The only thing NATO knows how to do now is propaganda. That's it. People get mad at the Russians. Hey, you guys are not properly fighting the info war. Well, they don't do info war. If you know the understanding of Russian culture, they're pretty straightforward. You know what I mean? They not a whole lot of BS. If a Russian guy says I'm gonna punch you in the face, he's probably gonna punch you in the face. They don't do a lot of bluffing and stuff like that. They're straightforward, right? So, and cynical. Hey, look at their history, right? Pretty straightforward and pretty cynical. So the U.S. empire is going to come out and say, "Oh, well, all they can do. What else can they do? They cannot go to this NATO meeting and be realistic. They've staked everything on this, and all they know, but they do know how to do propaganda. So they'll go there, they'll fly the flag, they'll say how wonderful things are going. We're planning for more offensives in the future. We're building more bombs and things than ever. Zelensky's looking good. We've got a deep fake, what do you call it? They'll probably have video appearances of Zelensky and of the head of the intelligence, Ukrainian intelligence agency, both who are, I don't know if either of them are alive, but I'll tell you this, ain't neither one of them happy. Ain't neither one of them in the best of spirits, I'll tell you that. But they'll probably have like a big IMAX screen and they'll say, now let's hear from General Zelensky. And he'll be like, you'll see a voice, like the lips will be moving and the eyes will be still. I'm a General Zelensky. It'll be like one of those things, and you'll be like, that kind of almost looks like an AI generated piece of video. It will look like that because it will be AI generated piece of video where the lips move, and every now and then the eyes go side to side because the AI is like, I must make the eyes look normal, so I'll blink them every 3.7 seconds and make them go from side to side, and that'll look realistic. All they can do in NATO, first of all, don't get upset over the NATO meeting. Don't be like, oh my God, did you hear what they said yesterday? When it's going on, they'll be reporting, right? The NATO meeting, and people will be hanging on the edge of their chairs. Okay, sitting on the edge of their chairs. What are they going to say? And they'll be like, the first day, Joe Biden said, we're winning. All we do is win, 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 win. And we're winning and all looks good. And we're going to continue to do, and we shall surely defeat the Russians. Putin can't win. And everybody stood up and cheered and they said in unison, Putin can't win. Putin win. And you're like, oh my God, what are they? No, it is a cheerleading section. He's going to go cheer. He'll be confused. Don't get me wrong. He'll wander aimlessly around the stage for no apparent reason. He'll say things like God save the Queen, stuff like that. But he will be able to say Putin's a bad guy and we're the good guys, and everybody will join in. They'll say we're going to get the Russians. We can't stand around and wait for them. That's what they're going to do. It means nothing. It means zero. Don't let it bother you. You can't fight. You can't shoot me if you don't have bullets and a gun, and they ain't got neither anymore. What are they going to do? At this point. Now they'll talk about the F-16s. Yes, we're sending in F-16s. Really? What are they going to do? Air cover for the troops? Are you going to send F-16s, these fighters that were made in 76? They started making them 1976. And you're going to send them in against Russian S-400s and Buks and all of these other Russian anti-aircraft systems. What that would do is the whole world would look at it and say, holy crap, they all got shot down the first day. Can I buy one of those Russian anti-aircraft systems? And oh, by the way, the orders that I had for U.S. airplanes, cancel them. I don't need the airplanes. I need the S-300s and S-400s and Buks. I need the anti-aircraft systems from Russia, not the aircraft that's getting shot down. The stupidest thing that the U.S. could do would be send in a bunch of planes so the Russians could shoot them down, show video all over the place and brag. You go on Telegram. Hey, what do we got on Telegram today? An F-16. Woo, here's a missile. Boom, there's F-16. Boom, there's a mushroom cloud on the ground where the F-16 went down. It causes them nothing but problems. And who's going to fly them? I mean, just so many problems. They can send them in, but they'll all get shot down. All the rest of the planes got shot down. What's going to be different about the F-16s? They are not stealth or anything like that. They're out of here. And as we already know, they wouldn't even send them their newest F-16s because they know they're going to shoot them down. They'd find some old ones with the wheels hanging off that are just about ready to go out of service. The airframe has cracks in them. And they'll say, here you go. We give you a dozen F-16s. Go fly them towards the Russians. Should we do anything else? Do you know a good priest? Yeah, you might want to you have them give you your last rites. We're not saying you're going to die, but just in case you do, you want to, make amends with your dear and fluffy Lord before you get in this F-16 and head towards the Russians, because you might be meeting them. If you believe in him, trust me, you'll believe you might be meeting them soon. So that's that. So that's the bottom line. Going into this disastrous occurrence that the NATO meeting is going to be, expect nothing but propaganda. That's what it's going to be. But I've touched on all of the things, and expect the Russians to take their time. I could be wrong. The Russians could be doing a gigantic offensive right now. I think now, don't get me wrong. I understand the Russians aren't going to do any offensives, because the Russians may simply say, now what we're going to do is we want to move the contact line. There's another line of defense that the Ukrainians have, right? So the Russians might say, we want to crush the current line of defense and move it back to their final line of defense. Because if I'm not mistaken, there's kind of a line of defense now, but further in, there's a final line of defense. If I'm the Russians now, I may want to knock this line of defense down, go up to their final line of defense to put the pressure on, and then just not overrun it, just keep hitting it, just keep bombing it, just keep attacking, just keep weakening. Because as they weaken Ukraine, they weaken NATO, they weaken the US empire. As they weaken Ukraine, they get the US closer and closer to an election. As they weaken Ukraine over the course of time, Joe Biden is going to get hit harder and harder by his political opponents, and his issues at home are going to grow. So that's what I think happens. I think the Russians take time. I think NATO just goes, and the preachers of NATO will say all is going well. Do not be misled. We're winning. The Ukrainians are going to win. The last thing I'll say is this. At some point, you could see, because of the futility of this offensive that the Ukrainians are doing, keep an eye on the reaction in Ukraine. There are going to be a lot of people in Ukraine that aren't thrilled about what's going on. And of course, if you're in the Ukrainian military, if your family's in the Ukrainian military, if you're in Ukraine, right, and they're like, yeah, we're going to launch our offensive and take the Russians out. They launch an offensive and they just get slaughtered. At that point, if I know the war is over, the Russians know the war is over, and you know the war is over, the people fighting the war clearly know the war is over. And their job now is to sit around and catch artillery. Is sit around and have drones and missiles slam them in day in and day out. So is there going to be a lot of a spirit amongst the ranks of the military that are going to want to continue a fight when they know they've lost? Is there going to be a lot of spirit amongst the Ukrainian people? There's going to be at some point, there's going to be problems in Ukraine. They're going to have some real problems. And there could be violence. That's an unstable country. So to some extent, they could have some violence wherein some of the leaders of Ukraine face some kind of an internal coup or internal violence. It's a mess. But again, as long as the Russians take their time and move slow, these things are inevitable. It's inevitable that it's going to fall, that all of the dominoes are falling in place for them to have an easy victory. I don't think the Russians want to crush everything. Why do they want to lose a lot of men and women? I think what the Russians want to do is create a dynamic where they have the upper hand to a point where when the deal goes down, they can get whatever they want. And there's pressure from all around the world, including inside the empire, outside the empire, Africa, Middle East, everywhere, saying, you got to end this thing. And they are in the situation where they are primed for the best deal that they can possibly get, and which they can walk away from. Remember, whenever you're trying to get a deal, I learned this. I used to be a salesperson. You've got to say, I got to walk away with certain things from this deal, and if I got to do that, and if not, I can walk away. I can walk away from the deal. I got to have this, and this, or I can walk away. I had deals where I wanted to deal real bad, and the person says, "All right, I need to get it for whatever." You know what I mean? When I was selling things, it was, you would sell cameras and security systems and things like that. There was installation, and then there was like a monthly maintenance or whatever fee. And I said, okay, it's going to cost you $8,000 and $180 a month. And somebody might say, well, I'll do the deal, but it's going to cost, I can only do it for $6,000 and $120 a month. And I looked at it and I thought to myself, my commission out of this is $2,000. If I do that, I don't make any money. I ain't cutting that deal, which meant I could walk away from that deal at that point because it was no value. It's a deal where, look, I can sell you this stuff. I got to eat. I get paid. And when we all walk away with the pen. I know you want a really good deal, but I can't walk away with that deal because there's nothing in it for me. Whenever there's a deal set up, the person who is at most advantage, whenever you're working, negotiating for a deal, you're in the advantageous position if you can walk away with no deal. If you can say, I don't have to have a deal. The Russians are going to be in a position where they're going to say, we are asserting, we are ready next. We can take Odessa and Kharkov. We can take whatever we want. Ukraine can't fight anymore. We can move on. We can continue to punish them. Ukraine's falling apart internally, politically, economically. Everything is falling apart. Now, here's what we want. You can either do that or we'll just keep on fighting. We'll walk away from the deal. The Russians can walk away from the deal. They will get to a point where NATO can't walk away from the deal because the pressure will be so intense. And that's when Russia has the initiative diplomatically, when they have the position that they can walk away from the deal and NATO can't. And I believe that time is coming. Let's take a look at, and all NATO's going to do, let's just say, all they're going to do at that meeting is try to avoid that. All they're going to do at that meeting is pretend amongst themselves that everything's great, everything's fine. They're winning. They can't possibly lose. All good. All right, so we're going to look. Super chats always have some good questions. What do you think? Reference NATO doing something sneaky and coming into Ukraine with everything. Just a rumor, I hope. With what? Here's that. Think about this. If I'm going to shoot you, I got to have bullets and I got to have a gun. NATO has been demilitarized. And when you say coming into NATO with what? With everything. What are they going to take, 1 million troops? And Scott Ritter talked about this. If you're going to the border of Russia to fight, right? You have to muster your troops, your equipment. You have to bring all that stuff together on the border, then go in, right? How long is that going to take? I don't think they have enough time to bring together all the stuff. First of all, they don't have the equipment to bring together for the troops to use to fight the Russians. Number one. Number two, they don't have the time it would take because Ukraine will fall before that to muster those troops. Number three, they don't have the wherewithal because you're going to see here in the United States and in Europe, you're going to see a disastrous, response for the U.S. empire. You're going to see the people every day on the street saying, time out, we didn't ask for this. We don't want to go. And you're going to have an economic pushback, political pushback where there will be people who won't stand up for anything that'll say, time out. We're going to all die in a nuclear exchange. This is too far. So no, I don't think you can't doing something sneaky. You can't sneak 500,000 troops into position to attack with the equipment that they'll need. And if they fought, what happens after day 2 when they're out of equipment? They'd be in the same position that Ukraine is in. So no, it's too big to sneak. Let's go next. Blex. Thank you, Blex. Sparky says, make Ukraine Russia again. There you go, Sparky. Sparky's always got great comments. How about Sabar Transportation says, the only hope NATO would have is Turkey supplying troops, but these neocons have already been trying to coup their government for years. Yeah, now there's no possibility of Turkey going to war with Russia. That's not happening. Turkey has the second largest land army in NATO, and there is no possibility they're going to war with Russia. Number one, they're making nice with Russia. Tourism is big, and the number one tourist destination for Russians and the number one tourist customers for Turkey is that interaction. All these Russians are coming in spending money. Turkey ain't doing that. So that's not going to happen. Putin is an anti-globalist hero. That's what Sparky has to say. A lot of people believe that. Simatagi says, Western hubris is the biggest extinction factor for our planet. You are correct. Sparky, Orca rebels rule. I'm not sure what that means, but hey. Honeybell says, thank you for all you do, Garland. I hope more people wake up soon before it's too late. Thank you, Honeybell. Sparky says, build a better, more peaceful world with BRICS. I think that's the direction that the world is going, Spark. Sabar Transportation, NATO countries will still be begging to join BRICS. Yeah, they already are starting. They're starting. They see the direction it's going. Look at France. How about this? Garland, you should fire up the old hovercraft and lead the Orca rebel into battle against the globalist empire. Yeah, no, my days of hovercraft piloting are far behind me. But thanks anyway, Spark. Fire up the old hovercraft, the hover mother. We used to jokingly call it the hover mother. Gee, can you please say it again? Putin let us move up 200 miles now. No, let us move up 100 feet. That was so funny. Do you have a writer? No, I don't. I just, whatever comes up in the old pumpkin head here, I say. Putin derangement syndrome existed long before Trump derangement syndrome. Yes, the two have been merged. Most, if not all, bad things said about Putin are from 20 years of Western propaganda. Putin's actually a righteous man. That's what Sparky says. Here's what I have to say. My investigations into Putin is I don't see anything about Vladimir Putin that I see as evil or as a dictator or bad or anything like that. He seems like a person who runs his country. He seems like a person who runs his country conservatively. We're $33 trillion in debt, and Russia is actually, not only are they not in debt, they actually have a surplus. So he seems like a reasonable statesman to me. If someone can show that he's all these evil dictators, I've heard those assertions made, but I haven't seen the evidence. I'm open. I always say this: any assertion somebody makes is just an assertion. Putin's an evil dictator. That's an assertion, but you've got to give me some evidence. I haven't seen the evidence. I'm open. If I see the evidence, fine. I haven't seen it, and I follow this stuff all the time. So he just seems like what I would consider a fairly conservative, consistent statesman. Quite trustworthy. When he makes a deal with a country, he keeps the deal. He seems to keep his word. I can't find an instance where Putin said I will or won't do this and he went the opposite direction. So he seems like most countries around the world feel like if they make a deal with Russia, that Russia will keep the deal. Many rumors that the Poles and Baltic military will enter the conflict and take the western regions after Ukraine army collapses. What do you think? They'll only do what Russia allows them to do. The Poles and the Baltic military, which is roughly the size of a Boy Scout troop, would be dead in an hour if they tried to go in and go up against Russia. So the truth is they exist at the leisure of Vladimir Putin. If they go in there, that leisure may start to, subside. So, yeah, they just don't have the military power to do it. They would if they could, but they can't, so they won't. How about that? Sparky, Zelensky will look like Clutch Cargo on the big screen. Yeah, exactly. Back in the old days, there was max headroom. He's max headroom now. As Ukraine slowly collapses, the U.S., EU, Brit banking system is also collapsing. It's time for a new world. I agree. Good point. Excuse me. Good point. We could go on and do a whole video about that. All right. How about this? Jamfar 777s. They're out of touch. They're out of time. They're out of their head. I'm out of touch. That was a super sticker from Gestoris Panama. Hey, I guess I got that right. All right. How about we go to Sparky? Orcas have been attacking elites' yachts lately. Oh, that's interesting. Hey, orcas are smart. Is anyone in West Ukraine saying enough? I don't think so, but I think that time is coming. Mr. Nice Guy. Thank you, Mr. Nice Guy. Let's check out Rockfin. On Rockfin. Okay, username says, I assume the cabal intent to surpass and replace Russia's energy importance to Europe. The Kiev Junta totally said their country and their countrymen. The war game is over. The Ukrainian people lost. Yes, sir. Good point. Username also says, I think the U.S. or Western cabal people is after everything below Ukraine's surface. Ukraine's enormous energy reserves, oil, gas, rare earth mines, minerals. Let me say this, and then what else? They're after that everywhere, always. So good point. BlackRock and arable land is to a degree just a sideshow or a bonus. All help, military and otherwise, were given on some form of lend-lease basis and were paid back as mining concessions or the like. Yeah, they want to rob Europe like they do. Rob Ukraine like they do all of their friends. They can't be trusted. How about we say Tabernacle says historically dictators who keep their people fed and safe are usually called great kings or emperors. Look, people got to eat. They're happy if they eat. That's it. People are happy if they eat. Okay, I think that's it. Camilla V, same to you. Thanks, Camilla V. Chicken Patty, love you, Chicken Patty, Camilla V, and everybody. Thanks a lot, everyone. Don't forget, last but not least, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/GarlandNH to donate. Buy me a coffee is easy. It's just like buy Garland a coffee for $5. And you can buy as many coffees as you want. And now it's just like Patreon, where you can say, I want to do this monthly and just do a subscription, $5, whatever a month. So buy me a coffee is great. Also, patreon.com. That's also a great option if you can afford it. Don't PayPal. And of course, my Cash App information is there. Last but not least, there we go. Last but not least, I'll get up with brother Scott Ritter and get him back on soon. And Scott and I both will be on the mother of all talk shows this evening, so that ought to be great. And if you can, please, let me also add this, make sure that you become a member. It costs nothing. It's free. Go to my Rockfin page, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Please, everybody's got to be a member there because they could throw me off YouTube at any time. And if they do, you got a way to watch me without advertisements. If you can afford on Rockfin, you can become a subscriber. It costs $14.99 a month. Or if you sign up for a year, they give you a couple months free so that it's a little cheaper. So that's an option if you can afford it. You don't have to do that. You can sign up for free. The subscribers do get the 1 weekly show, 1 hour weekly subscriber only show with Scott Ritter and I every Wednesday from 9 to 10, except this morning Scott had some car troubles or something. He couldn't do it. But we'll be back on soon. Thanks a lot, everybody. See you on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway this evening. Peace. I'm out.